Okay, we are in the last, Joshua 24, and then Judges. So let's look. And we already saw him give a speech to the leaders. Now he's giving a second speech. So verse 1.
Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, the officers of the Israel, and they presented themselves before God.
Okay, so the last speech was to the leaders, and it was at, now I forgot the name of the city. It's where they have the tabernacle. This time it is in the city of Shechem, and it's to all Israel. So why? Shiloh, yeah. It's, my mind nowadays is names. So now they're in Shechem. So why did they move? Well, Shiloh's kind of in mountainous valley areas. So Shechem is the same place that we saw where they had the two mountains, and half the tribes were on one mountain, half the tribes were on the other mountain. One had blessings, one had cursings. Shechem is the city in the middle, and it's got a kind of amphitheater effect. So they could bring all the tribes there, and they could hear it because, of course, they don't have a mic system. So they have to, it's amazing how their voice could carry in some of these valleys. So this is a dramatic last gathering of all the tribes before Joshua dies. So they come, Joshua is going to give them a call to remember their commitment. Sometimes we all need to remember our call, our commitment. So we've seen Shechem several times.
Shechem is here.
Yeah, Shechem is up north. It's only about 10 miles from Shiloh, but a lot more open in the amphitheater effect. So Shechem is where Abram, when he first came to the Promised Land, that's where he camped, in Shechem. When Jacob returns with his huge family to meet Esau and all that, he comes to Shechem. And he buys land there, and he builds an altar in Shechem. Shechem is also the city, if you remember, Simeon and Levi and their sister got raped by the king's son. That was the king of Shechem. And they went and killed all the, they tricked everybody into being circumcised, and then they killed them all. And that's why Simeon and Levi had curses on them, because they did that kind of thing. But that's that city. So we've seen that city several times. So first, Joshua starts off with a history lesson, verses 2 through 4.
Okay. And Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, from ancient times your fathers lived beyond the river, namely Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan, and multiplied his descendants and gave him Isaac. And to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau, and to Esau I gave Mount Seir to possess it. But Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt."
We don't really think of Joshua as a prophet, but he's speaking as an inspired messenger from God, which is the definition of a prophet. We usually think prophet, someone that prophesies future events. But prophecy is speaking God's word. Yeah. So Pastor John is a prophet. He's speaking God's words. Joshua reminds them that their forefathers came from the other side of the river, just like they came from the other side of the river. But the other side of the river this time was the Euphrates River. And before they came across that river, they worshipped pagan gods. They didn't worship the same God. Now there's ancient legends, and again they're legends, they're not scriptural, that say Abram served God among the idol worshippers. Even though he grew up and everybody was worshiping idols, the legend is that he didn't. One legend says that his father Terah was an idol maker and sold idols out of his own shop. And one day Terah had some business to do, so he left Abram in charge of the idol shop. And while his daddy was gone, Abram took the biggest idol and he set him in the middle of the floor. And then he put all the other idols in a little circle, and he put a hammer in front of that big idol. When his father came home, he was kind of mad. He was ticked off. And he asked Abram, he put the hammer in front of the big idol, but then he smashed all the other idols. And so that's why Dad was really mad. He said, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "Abram, you know that an idol is nothing but a statue and it can't do anything." And Abram said, "Father, yes, that's true. So why are you worshiping him? Why are you so?" Now, again, legend. Nothing scriptural about that. But I like the legends because they're like wacky. Abram was not born a Jew. Grew up in an idolatrous home. Where he was originally from, and then Haran, both centers of idol worship. So Joshua is telling them, you came from an idolatrous background. Don't think you're all that. He wants to make sure they stay humble and know they had pagan beginnings. And the message is, wow, we were such a mess. But look what God did for us. It's good for us to remember we were such a mess. Yes. And look what God did for us. Verse 5 through 7. More history.
I told you.
Yeah.
Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I afflicted the Egyptians by what I did there, and I brought you out. When I brought your people out of Egypt, you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued them with chariots and horsemen as far as the Red Sea. But they cried to the Lord for help, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. He brought the sea over them and covered them. You saw with your own eyes what I did to the Egyptians. Then you lived in the wilderness for a long time.
So there could be a few in the crowd that were children in Egypt, because when God said the grown men were going to all die in the wilderness, some of the children could have grown up and still been around. Isn't it interesting? How long did it take us to study the Exodus? And here it is in one verse. And you lived in the wilderness a long time. That's Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, all in one sentence.
Yeah, interesting.
We could have skipped it all. They lived in the wilderness a long time. So, more history, verse 8 through 10. This is more current history.
8 through 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
I brought you to the land of the Amorites who lived east of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I gave them into your hands. I destroyed them from before you and took possession of their land. When Balak, son of Zippor, the king of Moab, prepared to fight against Israel, he sent for Balaam, son of Beor, to put a curse on you. But I would not listen to Balaam, so he blessed you again, and I delivered you out of his hand.
Okay, so this is all about stuff we studied about conquering the land on the eastern side of the Jordan. So just more history. And then verse 11 through 13 kind of links the ancient history to the recent history. Not too ancient for them, but verse 11 through 13.
And you went over the Jordan and came to Jericho, and the leaders of Jericho fought against you, and also the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I gave them into your hand, and I sent the hornet before you, which drove them out before you. The two kings of the Amorites, it was not by your sword, but by your bow. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities that you had not built, and you dwelt in them. You eat the fruit of the vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant.
Okay, so we get something we haven't seen here before. In verse 12, it says God sent the hornets.
Yeah, what was that?
So, a couple options here, that he actually sent hornets. And, you know, if you're attacked by hornets, you're going to be weakened. The other idea is Egypt came and attacked. The hieroglyphic sign for Egypt is a hornet. Egypt frequently attacked that area. They liked that area. It was the easiest trade route to get to other places. So whoever controlled that controlled trade routes. Egypt liked controlling that. So they'd come attack regularly. So it could be God saying, I sent them to weaken the Canaanites before you had to even fight them. It's also clear that their success was not because of their swords. It was God. God took care of things. In the same way that blessings are something we don't deserve. There's times where it's even more obvious that we don't deserve a blessing. And they've got a lot of blessings they sure don't deserve. So one of them that's mentioned here is they didn't have to build their own houses. They took over the houses of the people they conquered. They didn't have to plant their own vineyards and orchards. It takes time once you plant a vineyard or an orchard for things to grow and mature and bring fruit. Grapes will bring fruit right away, but they're not good grapes for several years. So they're coming into mature orchards, mature grapes, not because of anything they had done. And they're also to remember that the people that planted these things, the houses that they're taking over, God conquered them. God brought judgment on them because they were such evil people. And watch out, because if you disobey God like they did, you're ripe for judgment. Okay, verse 14.
Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped before the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord.
Okay, so yours left out the word therefore. Therefore, fear the Lord, which is an important word. Anytime you see the word therefore, you have to wonder, what is therefore? Why are they to fear the Lord? Because of everything that Joshua just talked to them about. Because God had done so much for them and brought them out of Egypt and gave them the land. He had been with them throughout their history, and He's with them now. And because of all this, serve him. But not just serve him, not just do the actions, but serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. It's easy to just take the steps, but he wants your heart. You're doing the steps without your heart mean nothing to him.
And also he requires throw away the gods of your ancestors.
Yeah.
That's the action.
Yeah, and he's saying, don't even look at the gods of Egypt or the gods Abram followed before he came into the promised land. Don't look at the gods of the Canaanites. You don't need them. Joshua is calling for a deep and true commitment. Verse 15. This is fun. Miss Betty, you have your glasses. You can read.
Okay. Just the one verse.
Just 15, yeah.
If it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served, which was beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.
How many times have you seen that last part on signs all over? It's great, but don't forget the first part. Maybe there were some among them that didn't want to serve the Lord. They're seeing their Canaanite neighbors and thinking, oh, I like their God. Why they would, I don't know. Maybe they were having a problem with, why would a loving God allow this? You know, things we hear today. So they turn away from God. An important thing this points out is everyone has a choice. You can choose to serve God or yourself. No in between. And it's important to be aware of the other choice and have a clear view of the truth. That's why I'm so excited for this year's VBS, because the theme is God's truth versus what the world says. It's never too early to teach that to kids. And we need to remember that sometimes. Joshua had seen lots of choices. Think of all the different cultures they had seen in their travels. Lots of choices around. And all the different gods they'd seen people worship. But none of those gods could compare to God. And none of those gods were real. There's only one real God. And Joshua understood that he, as the head of the family, he was responsible to see that his whole family served the Lord. He represented his family before God. Now, could he force his family to worship God? Can we expect the fathers in our families, do we want the fathers in our family to force our family to worship God? That's not going to go very far. I think I see that happening a lot in the culture around us, and their kids get really rebellious. But the father is to lead. I know lots of people say, well, I'm not going to make my child go to church. I'm going to let them make their own choice. Well, you're blocking out a choice. That's, no, bring them, they're young, bring them to church so they are aware of what the real choices are.
Make them go to school.
Yeah, you do make them go to school, yeah. I'm going to leave them home so they can choose whether to go to school or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, same idea.
There's
They're
a
not gonna
fine
learn.
line you have to walk and not go one way or the other.
Yeah. So the idea is Joshua would lead a godly example in his family. to help ensure that they worship God. He would not allow worship of any other god in his house. But each person is still responsible for their own actions. At a point, they are going to have to make a choice. But they need to be able to make an informed choice. And if you don't have them attend church, it's not an informed choice. They'll get informed by, my granddaughter's really into Reddit.
What's that?
Reddit. It's an app. It's an app, and it's very popular with a lot of young people, a lot of discussion. You can find a discussion group on anything in the world. But you're going to get educated by that kind of thing. So we're always talking to her about, well, she'll say, I read this. Oh, that was wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, here's what God's word says. So you can't force someone to worship God, but you sure can put things in the right perspective for them. Okay, so if you're going to do that sign, if you're going to have that sign engraved the first part of it too, so they know people have a choice. Okay, verse 16 through 18.
So people answered and said, Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For the Lord our God is he who brought us and our fathers up out of the land of Egypt, in a house of bondage, who did those great signs in our sight, and preserved us in all the way that we went, and among all the people through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out from before us all the people, including the Amorites, who dwelt in the land. We also will serve the Lord, for he is our God. I'm sorry.
That's it.
Oh,
Okay, so they say, we're in. We agree. We are going to serve God. We're going to not worship these other gods. Sounds really good, but we already know they're not going to do a good job of it. But I believe at this time their hearts are in it. But then they're going to get distracted.
And actually, Joshua didn't bring up all their failures, and maybe they forgot.
Yeah.
And this was, you get in a crowd, and they're all doing.
Who's going to say, I'm not doing that?
Yeah, so it's the crowd.
Yeah. Well, and they're all enthusiastic, and I'm sure they
scary.
really mean it. It's like if you've ever been. Promise Keepers used to do these events at a huge stadium, huge stadiums, and David would go and he'd come back and say, just the music was, all these men singing, and it was so worshipful, but a lot of them were just singing, and then they'd go home and do what they were doing before. It's got to be a heart change. They're in the excitement of following
caught up
God.
in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that moment's not going to, they're on a mountaintop experience.
Feelings.
Yeah.
Feelings.
Yeah. And it's not going to last. Okay, verse 19 through 24. Yeah.
But Joshua told the people, you will not be able to worship the Lord, because he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions and sins. If you abandon the Lord and worship foreign gods, he will turn against you, harm you, and completely destroy you after he has been good to you. No, the people answered Joshua, we will worship the Lord. Joshua told the people, you are witnesses against yourselves that you yourselves have chosen to worship the Lord. We are witnesses, they said. Then get rid of the foreign gods that are among you, and turn your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. So the people said to Joshua, we will worship the Lord our God and obey him.
So the first statement seems kind of confusing. Joshua was saying, you're not going to be able to do this. Well, he's right. They aren't going to be able to do this. He's saying you can't, he's not saying you can't serve God, but he's saying it is a commitment. And it better not be a superficial commitment. So he's kind of sensing the crowd. He's reading them, and he's seeing the worshipful experience, but their hearts. He's saying it isn't an easy commitment. If you turn from this commitment, oh boy, are you going to be in trouble. Joshua was also saying he doesn't want people trusting in him, but in God. There have been so many men of great faith in history. I always admired Billy Graham because he lived his talk. He lived his faith. But he never called anybody to trust in him, but in God. And a great man of faith, that's what they're going to do. They don't want the admiration for themselves. They want you to worship God. Billy Graham died. It didn't change my faith. Because it's not in Billy Graham I have faith. It's in God. Yeah. Unfortunately, there are people who trust men more than God. It is not uncommon at all when a church changes pastors for them to lose a good amount of their congregation because people are following the pastor and not God. There are some times where, yes, someone comes in and you just cannot sit under their leadership. That's a different thing. Although you should try to work it out, not just say, oh, I don't like his preaching style. It's not the pastor you're following, it's God. Okay, verse 25 through 28.
On that day, Joshua made a covenant for the people, and there at Shechem he drew up for them decrees and laws. And Joshua recorded these things in the book of the law of God. Then he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak near the holy place of the Lord. See, he said to all the people, this stone will be a witness against you. It has heard all the words the Lord has said to us. It will be a witness against you if you are untrue to your God. I think some of the things that Joshua said there, it's going to be really tough. If you forsake God, this is what's going to happen. It goes back to the fear of God, which an easy definition is take God seriously. Mm-hmm. It's an awe, it's a respect, but it's okay, God says it, then I need to take it seriously. I think that's what Joshua's sort of calling the people here to do. Yes. Take this seriously. Yeah. Because, where they said that, far be it from us to forsake the Lord. It's like,
and it was interesting, he said, get rid of the idols among you.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Why do you have idols among you? Yeah. So he's renewing, it's time to renew their covenant, their commitment, their covenant. When it says Joshua made a covenant, in Hebrew it says Joshua cut a covenant. So if you remember way back to Abraham, we talked about, Moses, we talked about when they made a covenant, they would take an animal, cut it in half, gross, spread it apart, and you'd walk hand in hand with the person you made the covenant with through the gross animal parts.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when they say cut a covenant, that's what it's talking about. It means a serious covenant where both parties are agreeing.
And Joshua set up a stone again.
Another stone. And so covenants required 2 witnesses. In this case, one of the witnesses is the people, and the other witness is a stone. How is a stone going to be a witness? It's a reminder. The stone isn't going to get up and say, oh, you did evil, I'm going to hit you. It's a reminder
All through the book of Joshua, the stones as reminders of.
Yeah, lots of stones in Joshua. We started with stones. When they crossed the river, there were stones. So he had called them to serve God. Now he's calling them to action. Again, get rid of any idols. Again, why do they have them at all? Are they keeping souvenirs?
They weren't supposed to take them from the people anyway.
No, they were supposed to destroy them. Kind of like the legend where Abram smashed them. They're supposed to do the same thing. Smash
them. It's like a Catholic Church and Orthodox. Oh, we don't pray to them, but just respect those people. Or, no, God doesn't want us.
Yeah, but they do pray to the saints, to intercede. But we don't need that. We don't need idols. Verse 28 said, Joshua dismissed them, every man to his inheritance. Time to go conquer those Canaanites. Just had your rally. Let's go get them now. They're expected to kill all the Canaanites. We're going to see how well that goes. And then it says that, and then Joshua added all these things to Moses' book of the law. So Moses wrote the first 5 books. Joshua added all this stuff. Obviously, he didn't write the next part, but he wrote up to this point. So verse 29 through 31.
After these things, Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in his own inheritance at Timnath Serah, which is in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountain of Gaash. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, and had known all the works that the Lord did for Israel.
So Joshua was buried in the land that he was given. Doesn't seem to have been any kind of national funeral or great mourning for him, or at least we aren't told about it.
No, like Moses.
But he has the greatest tribute of all. He served the Lord. What more could someone ask to be said of them? And it says, Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who were the elders at the time of Joshua, who outlived him. They continue to serve, but it won't last. But it's there for now. So Joshua is gone. Verse 32 says, as for the bones of Joseph, which the people of Israel brought up from Egypt, they buried them at Shechem, in the piece of land that Jacob bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money. It became an inheritance of the descendants of Joseph. So all this time, we haven't heard about Joseph's bones since they left Egypt. They've been lugging these bones around, I'm sure with honor, and so now it's time to let him rest in the promised land. Before he died, he said, take me back to the promised land. Bury me there. So it's time. He made that wish back in Genesis 50. So God completes what he started. Time to bury him. And he's buried at the spot that his father had bought. So one of the few pieces of land his father had bought. So he is now taken care of. No more lugging his bones around. I'm sure they had a big ceremony, but we don't hear about that. And then the last verse, verse 33.
And Eleazar, son of Aaron, died and was buried at Gilead, which had been allotted to his son Phinehas, in the hill country of Ephraim.
Okay, so Eleazar is kind of like the last big link to the wilderness generation. Now Phinehas becomes the high priest. Notice we're given a high priest, but we aren't given a national leader. We get the religious leader. God wants them to trust him as the leader of their country. But they need the high priest. So that is where Joshua ends.
I'm surprised that Joshua didn't appoint a leader after him. Like
God apparently didn't encourage him to do that. They were told not to have a king. And you start appointing a leader, they become the king. So God didn't want, he wanted the trust in him, not in an earthly ruler. Okay, so Judges. Judges covers the years sometime between, it covers about 340 to 410 years, somewhere in between there. People disagree about how long. It starts with the death of Joshua and goes through to the birth of Samuel. We're not sure of the starting date, but the end date would have been about 1020 BC. We don't know who wrote it for sure, but the Talmud, the book the Jewish rabbis wrote to help explain more, that is not scriptural, they say Samuel wrote it. But that's, again, not in Scripture. Now, a judge here is not what we imagine as a judge. Someone sitting in a court judging people. The Hebrew word is shafat, and that has more of the idea of an heroic leader. The name means to settle a dispute. So they are leading. And they are not national, none of them are national leaders. They're more like regional leaders. None of them are judges over all 12 tribes. So we're going to see that. We're going to see 12 judges. 6 of them, well, actually there's 13. We have 6 major judges, 6 minor judges, and then we have Abimelech, who is a whole special case on his own. So we'll see that. We're going to see 3 kinds of judges. We're going to see warrior judges like Gideon and Samson. We're going to see priest judges like Eli. And then we're going to see prophet judges like Deborah and Samuel. So a variety of kind of judges. You can't just peg them all as the same kind of person. So again, during this time, no national leadership, no king, no president, no prime minister. But God would raise up a temporary leader from time to time. And again, not a national one. For the most part, this person would rise up, do their job, and then be gone. Now, we get the impression that most of the time Israel was in rebellion and sin. But if you read carefully in here and look at all the years, there's only about 100 years out of the 300 to 400 years in this book that they are in actual rebellion against God. Now, I always assumed this was in chronological order of these judges. Yeah, this judge, and then this judge, and then this judge, but that's not necessarily true. Some of these judges might overlap because, again, they were more regional. For example, and they may be out of order. For example, Phinehas, we just saw him named as the high priest. He's the high priest at the beginning of the book, and he's mentioned at the end of the book. There's no way he lived 400 years. So, Hebrew writing, again, they are not really good about doing it in chronological order, which Western readers, we have a hard time understanding that. It's more of a collection of short stories and not in order. One theologian said, what we find out about man and judges is depressing. But what we find out about God in Judges is wonderful. On the human side, it is a story of disobedience and disaster. On the divine side, of continued direction and deliverance. We see just how patient God is with these mule-headed people. And he is patient with us mule-headed people still. We're going to see a cycle. We're going to see the people in a good place, and then they sin, and then they're punished, then they repent and find mercy. We're going to see that pattern over and over and over again. You would think they would learn, but they're in a pattern. So,
They're human.
Huh?
They're human.
They're human. We get into patterns. When I worked with Riverside County, I was the liaison between us and a domestic abuse provider that we use for the county. So I went to a lot of trainings, and it was all about the cycles. You go through the cycles. They're going through cycles. It's human nature to go through cycles. We're doing good, and then we forget God. And then God finds a way to bring us back. So it would be better not to forget God. Just skip that part of the cycle. Okay, so let's get into Judges. Verse 1 and 2.
Okay. Now it came about after the death of Joshua that the sons of Israel inquired of the Lord, saying, Who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have given the land into his hand.
Okay, so both Joshua and Judges starts with the death of a great leader. Joshua, Moses at the beginning of Joshua, and Joshua at the beginning of Judges. So it's tough to lose a great leader. It's easy to go wandering off. And Joshua didn't appoint a new leader. We've seen that. Do you think maybe the Canaanites also heard about the death of Joshua and thought, okay, they're leaderless now. They're not going to be a problem anymore. But God is the leader. They were expected to trust God. And they do go to the right source. They go to God and say, okay, who's going to lead us now? And it doesn't say, but I think they may be asking which person is going to lead us now. And God doesn't give them a person. He says, Judah's going to go first.
You mean whole tribe?
They're going to lead in battles. They're going to, and there's not going to be national battles here. There's going to be regional battles. So it's like you're supposed to go fight your own fights now. But they're still grappling for leadership, for human leadership. And they're asking for guidance, and God is giving it to them. Anytime you ask God for guidance, He gives it to you. Yes. Unfortunately, we're not going to see that phrase. We're not going to see the people inquire of the Lord again until the very end of the book. So in between, they're not seeking God. So God says the tribe of Judah is going to lead. They're going to fight.
This says, the Lord entered Judah is to go, I handed the land over to him. Him, the whole tribe?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And then Judah said to his brother Simeon, well, Simeon.
Yeah, but it's talking the whole tribe, because Judah and Simeon themselves have been dead for 450 years. They're not around. So it is talking the whole tribe.
Mine says into their hands.
Mine says them. And mine says him and them and things like that. But when it's addressing one of the tribe names and says him, it's talking about the whole tribe. That's just a rule of thumb. Now, the tribe of Judah is the tribe that the Messiah will come from. Yeah. and he will lead. He is going to lead the fight. But for now, they're looking at the tribe of Judah to lead. They are the largest and strongest tribe. So it makes sense for them to kind of go first. But they're not going to be like the rulers. They're not in charge of everybody. Again, remember, each tribe is expected to go conquer their own land and evict the Canaanites. That's the expectation. We're going to see how well that works out, but that's the expectation. Okay, verse 3 through 7.
Wow. The men of Judah then said to the Simeonites, their fellow Israelites, "Come up with us into the territory allotted to us, to fight against the Canaanites. We in turn will go with you into yours." So the Simeonites went with them. When Judah attacked, the Lord gave the Canaanites and Perizzites into their hands, and they struck down 10,000 men at Bezek. It was there that they found Adoni-Bezek and fought against him, putting to rout the Canaanites and Perizzites. Adoni-Bezek fled, but they chased him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and his big toes out. Then the Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off have picked up scraps under my table. Now, God has paid me back for what I did to them. They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there.
Okay, so Adoni-Bezek, have you heard God addressed as Adonai? That means Lord. So this is the Lord of Bezek, is this guy's name. So Adonai is not just addressed to God, it means Lord. So we get a military pact here. It seems pretty sensible. But some people suggest, well, that's not God's will. God told everybody to go get their own. But others look at it as, it's kind of like how God expects the churches now. We're all worshiping God. The ones that worship God, I would say, like evangelical churches, He expects us to work together, not against each other.
Absolutely.
But when they were starting to divide up the land, and the 2.5 tribes wanted to stay on one side, didn't God tell them at that time that if they stayed on that side, they still had to go and fight with their brothers?
And they did, and they spent 7+ years doing that, and they're now back on their own side. They were to help in the national war. Now we're to tribal wars.
Now we're back to separate.
Yeah, they went and conquered the land,
Okay.
but not conquered in the way we would think, where it all belongs to them. They've got all these people groups that are still there, and they have to go conquer them now.
Because some of the tribes are so much smaller.
They are.
Well, and
Simeon is one of the small.
Simeon was
Yeah.
within the
Simeon,
tribe of
yeah,
Judah.
Simeon is surrounded, and Simeon and Levi, or
Judah.
Simeon and Judah, the original Simeon and Judah were brothers from the same mother. I mean, they're all brothers, but they had the same mother, so they had a special
Bond.
bond.
And Judah has been destined for leadership since he got Jacob's blessing.
Yeah. So they're kind of a model. They're seeking God and cooperating with each other. And they were successful. And the Lord delivered their enemies into their hands. So then we get this king, Adoni-Bezek. He is a powerful king because he has 10,000 soldiers. That's a good-sized army. We know if you look back at the numbers for Judah, that Judah has so many more soldiers than that. But for a city, that is a lot of soldiers. His name means lightning, which could be associated with the Canaanite storm god Baal, who was represented by lightning. So a reminder, he's an evil guy. And they cut off his thumbs and big toes.
Can you imagine?
Now that was a common thing for Canaanites to do. Because if you cut off someone's big thumbs and their big toes, they can't hold a weapon.
Oh.
And they are warrior kings. So if you're a warrior king and you can't be a warrior, you're probably not going to be a king.
Is it because they cannot have balance?
You need your thumbs to hold things. And your big toes you need for balance.
Right.
Yeah. So,
how humiliating.
Well, and
it was, and that's exactly what it was
and
trying
you
to do.
don't have balance if you don't have your big toe.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah.
There is worse things that they did.
So it was a common thing to do. And this king, he says, I admit I've done it to 70 other guys. Now, did he count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 till he got to 70, put a notch on his shield or something? In reality, 70 is a way to say a whole bunch. I lost count type thing.
Yeah.
If you remember Jesus, when he's asked, how many times should I forgive someone?
Oh, yeah.
And it's not meaning get a calculator out and say, okay, I forgave them that time. No, it means a whole bunch. Yeah, just keep forgiving them. Well, he's saying, I did this to a whole bunch of guys. So he's not fighting this at all. Like, how could he? He's captured. Now, what were they supposed to do with rival kings?
They weren't supposed to name them.
Yeah.
They were supposed
They're not supposed to keep them as trophies. They're supposed to kill them. But
They're supposed to be executed.
yeah, and that's not happening. Now, the Romans also used this. In fact, if you wanted to get out of military service, you cut off your thumbs. Moms would regularly do this to their sons.
No.
So they couldn't be put into the Roman army. Yeah. And then once the king was mutilated, they were kept like dogs.
No.
Yeah, they sat under the tables and ate scraps.
Get out.
It was all meant to embarrass the king. And yeah, it did. But that's not what God wanted. He wanted them killed. They were in disobedience to do this.
Can you imagine?
Another interesting thing. What tribes are going to fight? It was Judah and Simeon. Bezek isn't in their territory. Why are they fighting outside the territory? And we don't know. Don't know why they did that. And when it says they brought him to Jerusalem and he died there, we don't know how long. We don't know if they... And they didn't really control Jerusalem. But he dies there. Don't know how long. And I think that is where we're going to end, because that's...
So next time.
Yeah, we're going to start with verse 8 next time. So, okay, I'm going to finish online. Bye, Debbie.